John Feuerbach here, chairperson of the Manchester Affordable Housing Trust. Today's meeting is a joint meeting of the MAHT and the Manchester Housing Authority. So as my role, I want to open up the meeting for the Affordable Housing Trust. So given that we have some remote Zoom presence, we're just going to go around and say present. So I am present.
Peggy Haggard-Steck, present.
Chris Aldi, present.
Sarah Melish, present. Gretchen Wood, present. Joan McDonald, present.
Excellent. So with that being done, let me give the Manchester Housing Authority the opportunity to open its meeting.
Manchester Housing Authority, Lane Persons, chairperson.
Beth Hasey.
Gretchen Wood. Gretchen Wood.
Now Elaine and Gretchen. Great. Okay. So let me, the purpose of the joint meeting of the MAHT and the MHA is to meet with and to engage with preservation of affordable housing, also known as POA. They were the sole respondent to the recently due request for qualifications that was issued by the MHA and the MAHT. As we outlined in the RFQ, it's an opportunity for both entities to work with, to engage with POA, in essence, to prepare us to be in a better position to issue a request for proposal at a later date. And the request for proposal would be to focus on, at a minimum, the housing authority sites and perhaps any other site that might come up. Before I go into the meeting, I just want to go over a couple of ground rules and also a clarification. We got some help in advertisement from SEMA, a citizens group in Manchester that has been a partner with us and has shown great support of the work that we do. They sent out a notice the other day, which I appreciate, but I just want to clarify. In the email that they sent, it appeared as though POA is coming to us as a developer, that they've actually issued a proposal. That's not the case. We are very clear in the request for qualifications to indicate all we were looking for were applications. And we could have accepted multiple applications from qualified respondents. And then our goal would have been to engage with each applicant to go over our proof of concept, determine what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of that concept.
She can't close the door.
And again, in the interest of preparing us to issue a request for proposal at a later date. So while I appreciate the help from SEMA, I just want to clarify, we're just in an engagement stage. At a later date, we will issue a request for proposal. If we then get a proposal from a developer that's qualified, we could then say what SEMA said, and that is we have a developer on board, we hope to work with them, work with the community, have community engagement, and hopefully we can move quickly to a construction start. So I just want to clarify that. And I don't know how many people are in the Zoom world or the audience, but we're going to assume that the Housing Authority and the Affordable Housing Trust will engage in this. We will ask questions, we'll have comments, and I think what we'll do is we'll leave a little time at the end for any comment that might be presented from folks who are either in attendance or who are by Zoom. It's 10 after 4. Why don't we assume we'll take it to about 5 o'clock, just in terms of times reference, so people have an understanding. I think we go forward with the sense that this is the first of multiple meetings. I don't think we're going to accomplish everything we want to do. I think there's going to be some reasonable follow-up, so we can then follow up at a time that we can determine. In terms of an agenda, I was thinking that I can just give a quick summary of the project history so everyone is clear in that regard. And then we could pause and let Alex Finnegan, who's our guest from POA, he's got a PowerPoint and he can go over the organization, who is going to be involved, what interests them in responding to the RFQ, the specific experience and comparable projects they have that would help us. And then he can highlight some of the takeaways that upon looking at our proof of concept study. And that can just be a point of departure. Then we could pause and then we can start talking about questions and comments. Okay, so just in terms of the project concept, we're probably going back to, I think, 2018. And I know there was engagement that we had with Department of Housing and Community Development, now Department of Housing and Equitable Communities, just about what possibilities, if any, could we pursue with regard to the Housing Authority site. We were talking about, at that early time, is it possible to have new construction on each site? What would be required to do that? How could we then have an offshoot element to rehab the properties? And we had some community engagements. It led to us issuing a request for proposal in 2018, a request for proposal where we actually were seeking a developer. Unfortunately, we didn't have a response, and that sort of compelled us to think about an alternative forward path. And I think we came to the conclusion that we needed to do a little bit more groundwork, a little bit more, get a better understanding of what we were looking for. And at that point, we brought on a consultant to do what resulted in the proof of concept. It's on the town website. There was engagement with the community to just, in essence, get the idea out for people to comment. We did community outreach such as surveys, we had resident meetings, and then we've had board and committee meetings just to pursue that. 2021, end of 21, November, we had a town meeting, multiple warrants. One of the warrants on the meeting was two items, non-binding requests for town support, for one, for the development concept, and two, to ask the town to consider relaxing an acquisition fee to reduce development costs, to then increase the possibility of having affordable housing. Both of those items were approved. Again, they were non-binding. But we felt as though that was very important for us because, one, it got the word out to the town. Two, it sort of affirmed the work that we have been doing. And three, ultimately, it just gave support for our initiative. With that, and then with the conclusion of the proof of concept report, we issued a request for proposal. I think it was in the mid of 2022. It was due in October. Unfortunately, we didn't get a response as well, so we're 0 for 2. We met again as committees, and we tried to figure out why weren't we getting responses. And after talking to our consultant, after talking to a couple developers who indicated that they would have responded, we found out information that led us to working to do a request for qualifications. We brought on counsel who is experienced in this type of work and the request for qualifications, and we got some important guidance on language. We issued the request for qualifications in the summer of this year, and it was due on August 28th, and we are here now with POA as an applicant. POA has met the eligibility requirements that we outlined in the request for qualifications, and we're very happy to have them here. So that's a brief summary. I don't, if there's anyone who wants to add anything to that?
Good.
Okay, so with that summary, why don't we now transition to Alex? Alex, so why don't you just figure, 10 minutes or whatever to introduce yourself, the organization, and, you can use the PowerPoint as your talking points, and that'd be great.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Thanks. All right, let's see, there we go, okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. And thanks for having us, and John, thanks for that helpful summary. We knew some of it because we'd seen one of the RFPs, but didn't realize that you'd done actually two. So, good for sticking with it and, being, persistent. So we're happy to be here. And, sorry, I'm just gonna minimize some of the stuff on my screen so I can see. But, yeah, so again, I'm Alex Finnegan. I'm from Preservation of Affordable Housing, or PAWA. And we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer, owner, manager. We're based in Boston. And we've been around for about 20 years. And over the course of that time, we've renovated and built over 13,000 affordable apartments across 12 states now in the District of Columbia, including some here in the North Shore, Beverly, Danvers, Salem. And I'm actually from Marblehead, and I know Manchester fairly well. My dad worked on K-Ban for a long time, so it's, just on a personal note, I think it's really great what you all are doing. It's accessing affordable housing in communities on Cape Ann and the North Shore, like Manchester by the Sea, is really difficult for some, and it's good to see you all kind of trying to be proactive about it and doing something about it. That's kind of what drew my interest to this when you issued the RFQ. So our mission statement is here on the screen. We do more than just build affordable housing. Our real objective is to help our residents access the tools and supports they need to thrive. And a lot of them face various forms of adversity in their lives. So here's a selection of some team members you might meet from PAWA. John Springfield, who's the third down, he's here. He couldn't be here in person, he's on Zoom, but John is a senior project manager on the development team, and he, along with Corey Meehan, who kind of runs our Boston developer team, are basically the project leaders of our redevelopment of a state public housing campus in Somerville. So in many ways very similar to the situation here in Manchester by the Sea, although of a totally different scale and context. But John and Corey are both intimately familiar with all of the obstacles and issues that towns face when they're trying to do something about their state public housing portfolios. And then Roger Brown, who's the bottom on the screen there, he runs our whole development team at PAWA. He's involved in all of our big kind of public housing collaborations. And I believe Roger knows one of the selectmen here in Manchester by the Sea, and I know he spends a lot of time up here. So I'll tell you quickly just about some relevant experience, but it's relevant in some respects and then totally not relevant in others. Because a lot of these are actually larger urban sites, whereas here we're in a small, dense, historic community with a totally different architectural context. But Clarendon Hill, that's the project that I referenced a moment ago that John and Corey are working on. That's Massachusetts State Public Housing, 260 units. They are transforming this community using, it's no longer DHCD, it's EOHLC, which is a much clunkier acronym. Hard to get used to it, but they're using their Housing Opportunities Program, PHO, to transform the site and bring in new density, market rate housing, new affordable housing that's not public housing, as well as replacing all of the public housing units. And John can talk about that if and when you want to talk about that. Flat 9 at Whittier in Boston, that was a Boston Housing Authority site. It looked somewhat like the Clarendon Hill picture you see up there, but we've transformed it into what it looks like today. There's a picture down there. It's in Roxbury, again, taking an old, obsolete public housing site and turning it into a mixed income community with a lot of different types of units and income, some commercial use. We're in the third phase of that right now. And that was using a HUD choice grant, tax credits. We can get into all the nitty gritty of the financing of these if and when you want there too. Berry Farm is in Washington DC. That's a huge transformation, reimagination of a public housing site into, at some point, it's gonna be almost 1,000 units there. Totally different magnitude than what we're talking about here. And then we recently just began working with the St. Louis Housing Authority, again, same kind of idea. Reimagining a public housing site into something bigger, more dense, more opportunity. But these, in many ways, the kind of tools and the financing mechanisms are potentially informative. But I think that some of our work, we do a lot of work on the Cape, Wellfleet, Bourne, and then also
Recording in progress.
oops. Do you want me to start over? I'm joking.
He's recording.
So I guess it went away on my screen. Doesn't seem like it's gone away on.
Somebody can just touch the got it on the screen.
Oh, is that what you have to
Want
do?
me to do it?
Here, I
Just
can-
touch it?
Yeah, just touch it,
No, right, yeah, upper.
Oh, right, yeah, this is a Zoom screen here.
just touch got it.
Got it.
Perfect.
Oh.
For that. Nice. Yeah, so this is just, indicating that we do work in kind of communities that resemble Manchester by the Sea more. Two of these projects, actually, John has been the project manager on. So I think, this was kind of our perspective on the goals and our role, which John has already really talked about. But just to reiterate, we are here just to help. In whatever capacity you want help from us from. We've had some experience obviously with helping housing authorities achieve what they want for their public housing portfolios, and we've had some experience working in communities similar to Manchester by the Sea. But really, we're here just as an information source, bounce ideas off. You can, we imagine this will be an iterative process and think through this. It's not easy it's admirable what I think you all are trying to do. It's not easy because of kind of the nature of some of the subsidies and a variety of different things that we can talk about. But you should just treat us as people, information sources that you can ask questions of and, whatever comes to mind. A sounding board for ideas is how I phrased it here in this slide. Do we want to talk a little bit now about our observations about the development concept plan, John? Or do you want to
Let's
pause?
pause right now and let's give an opportunity to MHA and MAHT. If there's any questions, point of clarification, just about POA itself. Organization.
Well, I guess I have one. Is that
Go ahead,
okay?
Irene.
Yes, some of these,
I just want to clarify, this is Irene
Frontiero.
Frontero, and she's the director of the Housing Authority.
Nice to meet you.
You as well. I just am curious, some of these projects you have seem large, with relatively
Yeah.
small compared to what you're doing.
Mhm.
Do you find any obstacles or challenges on being able to help us along that lines with financing and getting this feasible?
Well, I think those projects are all large. But we do projects that are 30, 40, 50 units. Some of these other projects, these are all much smaller scale. However, I think that scale is important, especially with state public housing, because the operating subsidy that you get to cover your expenses from state public housing is kind of break even. And it probably isn't, there are ways to change the nature of it, but adding density is a strategy and a tool to kind of make them more sustainable over the long term, the public housing projects. I don't know, I've not seen any financials for your portfolio here. I'm kind of making generalizations based on our
Right,
previous
but also
experience. Yeah.
included in that, I meant also the size of the properties themselves
Mhm.
and the obstacles because of the type of traffic.
Yeah, I do think those are challenges, yeah. The land that's on these sites are not clean development sites. There's a lot of incline and on, I guess, Newport Park has incline, there's some wetlands.
Thomas, why don't we do this?
Yeah.
Why don't we conclude the portion of you describing POA? Let's give Alex
Sure.
an opportunity, because he's looked at the RFQ and he's looked at the proof of concept, he's got some observations. Let's hear what he says, and then Irene, I think your questions could be, he might address them, or we can follow up.
I think you did, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Sure. So I think overall, the concept is a good one, and it's one that we and lots of developers and housing authorities employ, is to you have a limited number of tools to address kind of a deep-rooted problem, and that's lack of housing that's affordable to kind of workforce-type families. And one of that is land that you have as a housing authority. And so how do you use that to help address the problem? And one of those tools is to use that land to add more housing there potentially. And so we agree with that, we think that's a sound idea. And again, it is something that, it's a tool that lots of housing authorities are using and exploring right now, really across the country. Observations that housing, especially at the Plains and Newport Park, seems to be in good condition, comparatively speaking. I'm sure that it's old and probably has some capital needs, but compared to some of the housing we see, it's at least from the outside, it looks really nice. These are nice communities, and we couldn't go inside any of them. It could be different inside, but that's when I went by, I was like, oh, these look like really nice places to live, and the buildings look nice from the outside. And our other observation that you already kind of got to, Irene, is that the excess land on these parcels, nothing's impossible, but it's challenging. Newport Park there's a stream and then a fairly steep hill. The Plains is flatter, but there's some really kind of close abutters that we have found it makes it a little bit more challenging. And there's not just a lot of land. And then Loading Place Road also has the presence potentially of some wetlands on either side of the kind of undeveloped portion. The other side is a nice piece of land. It's not densely developed right now. But overall, it felt, and again, this is based on a very kind of preliminary read of this, so I don't want to make any of this sound like it's dispositive or final. But it felt like those would be hard places. It would be expensive to develop because it would require a lot of site work and then possibly wetlands mitigation, et cetera. So a challenge, for sure. Irene, do you want me to expand on that at all, or?
No, you go right ahead, thank you,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, good, because I didn't have much more to say on that. So, I think that just, there are a lot of different things that could be done, and I think John Springfield can jump in with some questions. There's a lot of unknowns from our perspective, but as kind of a general matter, and I kind of already said this, so I'm repeating myself a bit, but for as a public policy kind of objective to add more housing, and it also as like kind of a long-term financial health strategy for public housing, which traditionally has operational challenges because of the funding that you get from the state or the feds, depending on what kind of housing you're talking about. It's adding more housing to these sites is important. Adding density. So how do you do that? We kind of made these initial observations and said, oh, these maybe you could build something here, but it might not be that much, or it might be really expensive, and you could have a hard time at the state level getting the funding you need to really do a lot of intensive site work, because all of this capital, all the money you get for these things is really competitive, and it's hard to get to, and John can speak to that almost probably better than I can, but so you kind of have to present something that's really feasible and makes sense at the state level, and things that are developing on a site that's really not conducive to development can be a hard sell, not impossible though. So we kind of thought if there was another site, thinking about what your objective is to issue an RFP at some point, and what you want is to get a responses from a lot of different developers who are qualified and who can not only offer you visions that are consistent with what you want, but also bring new ideas into the conversation. I think it's important to find a way to offer a canvas in which more density can be added a little bit more easily. So that's why in our response to the RFQ, we said, well, geez, if you had another site you could put in that was a little flatter, a little more conducive, and large enough to add some density, maybe kind of, there's no magic to the public housing units to additional units you add, but we said maybe as a starting rule of thumb is a 1-to-1. So if you have 80 public housing units, you might want to be able to add 80 other units down the line. That's where we started from, but there are other ways to go about this, and we would love to hear kind of what you all are thinking, because you've been thinking about this for years, and I'm sure you have a lot of different ideas and thoughts, and it's probably not the first time you've kind of grappled with what I'm saying, so.
We assumed the 1-to-1. In fact, our consultant, when she issued the report, it pretty much fell out to about 1-to-1.
Yeah.
I think you're making an advertisement for one of the sites that we included in the study that wasn't included in the RFQ. It was only included as a maybe in the future.
Mhm. All right.
And that's the Pleasant Street site.
Yeah, right.
There was plans for the Pleasant Street site that made the plan that we're talking about now more feasible. Without the Pleasant Street site, you've got a blinking light there saying we have issues with number of units.
Yeah.
Just for information, the facility study is planning to use Pleasant Street for public safety building. So I think one of the questions would be what size lot does one need in order, as a separate lot, to make it financially feasible?
Yeah. These sites are all just including the public housing, and are they in the ballpark of maybe like 3 to 5 acres? Is that, or maybe a little bit larger? But it would have to be a site where you could probably fit 50 to 100 units, and because height is going to be an issue here, and just density, it's going to have to be a site of a decent amount of acreage.
We had assumed approximately 30 on Pleasant Street when added to the assumptions on Newport, the Plains, and the loading place. It brought us into the neighborhood of 1-to-1. Right now, there's 84 existing units.
Yeah.
So we figured that would get us. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly by not including Pleasant Street,
Yeah.
there's issues there.
Yeah, and I think like as I said, there are other things that could be done, I suppose, to make these sites more conducive to development, but just taking the pieces of vacant land that were identified in the study, those are just, they're challenging development sites. It'd be very expensive to build on.
It's sort of back and forth there. Is there any other comments or questions?
It's nothing new. We all know the problems.
Yeah. I think I guess another thing to think about, and John, if you're hearing us, you can definitely weigh in on some of this, but what's kind of informing this strategic kind of direction where you're adding density and like a 1-to-1 ratio is that with Massachusetts State Public Housing, you can kind of convert the operating subsidy to a different form, and John can give us the all of the technical terminology, but basically you don't change its nature drastically. It's more or less covering operating expenses, and it's not producing much surplus cash flow. And that is important because when you do produce surplus cash flow, more rental revenue than you need to cover your operating expenses and keep the buildings running, you can finance that. You can go out to a bank and get a mortgage, and that gives you upfront capital to do something with. And so when you're talking about, so just as an example, for federal public housing, there are programs. There's one called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, or RAD, and that's you convert the public housing subsidy. It's basically just covering your operating expenses to something called Section 8, which basically tries to track what fair market rent is in the market. In a place like Manchester by the Sea, those rents are really high because it's a very affluent town that's very desirable to live in. And so you suddenly the rental subsidy that you're collecting is a lot greater than your operating expenses. So that surplus money, you can go out and take a mortgage against the properties and use all that money to either rehab them or to put into the capital bucket, the bucket of funds that you need to build something new on the site. So if there's a way to kind of do something like that, like project-based vouchers, and I'm sorry to get into like technical terms quickly, but if there's a way to bring in some different subsidy onto these sites, that can open up some possibilities. At the very least, it can help you address some of the capital needs at the properties, the existing properties now. Of course, there's also the idea or the potential to demolish some of these buildings and build denser structures on their footprints. You know, like I said, when we saw them, we thought they looked really nice, and it's probably tough. It's going to be tough to convince the state to invest a bunch of money to demolish something that's really not obsolete, because they have a lot of more distressed housing projects in their pipeline. But it's not to say it's not possible. So there are some alternatives to this. John, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you said it really well. I mean, I think looking at Clarendon Hill and Somerville, that was, I think, towards the top of the state's list of the most distressed public housing. So I think a different category than these buildings and these properties are. So they, you know, their approach really was demolish and rebuild much denser. And it sounds just kind of maybe a different kind of context than these properties. But I do think the operating subsidy piece is a large piece, because it does allow you to leverage debt and then also operate sustainably in the long term. You know, to manage the maintenance piece well, to operate well. And I do think at other sites, the state's first instinct was to look to market rate development to cross-subsidize the affordable redevelopment. And that was kind of the main thrust of the Clarendon Hill and Somerville project, which was released in 2015, and it's taken us close to whatever year it is now, that many years, to really get going. And a big piece, I think, is that they maybe overestimated a bit the impact that market rate housing, kind of what it could bring to the table in terms of cross-subsidy. It wasn't as great as they had hoped. So I think kind of whatever kind of structuring, the town is looking at. I think mixed income is great in terms of kind of, providing a community with, a range of opportunities for folks, but I do think it'll still probably require a large amount of capital subsidy, even if there is some kind of higher income housing on the site. So I think, looking to capital subsidy, whether it's through the state agencies or low-income housing tax credits, as well as operating subsidies, will need to be kind of a main component of any new construction on the site. Hopefully that makes sense and is helpful.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, the other thing, obviously, that has happened since the first RFP and everything is just an incredible amount of inflation in the construction market that is not really alleviated at all, so.
And what's your experience working on these other PHA sites regarding construction costs? Are you paying like the prevailing Davis-Bacon rate?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great question. Alex, I can start. So any on-site work, with government subsidy, with the public housing partnership is prevailing wage, which obviously creates, can be a budget challenge. I mean, obviously good wages and good working conditions are important, but it means that the construction costs are higher than they might be otherwise. And so that's something that, it requires more commitment from the state.
John, did you explore different partnership arrangements or participation agreements between the PHA and yourself? And even doing that, was it a goal to pay the Davis-Bacon, or is it something that you just found like you could not get around? Is there a participation agreement that you could skirt that?
That's a good question, and I think there's two good examples to illustrate. One is Brewster Woods, which is in Brewster on the Cape, which is one of the pictures that Alex showed earlier. It's kind of it's a lower height, smaller scale. It's 30 units on 5 acres. It's the bottom right with the garden boxes that. Yeah, exactly. So that was a partnership with the Housing Authority. It's the Housing Authority's land. It's a long-term ground lease of that land, and it's a relatively minimal involvement from the public. I mean, it's a partnership, but there's not as much direct involvement from the Housing Authority, and that project is not required to pay prevailing wages. Just due to where the financing came from, there wasn't direct HUD involvement in such a way that would trigger those wage rates, and there wasn't Housing Authority involvement that would trigger those wage rates. And that's kind of in contrast with the larger public housing sites, which have, partially I think it's where the financing is coming from that has strings related to construction wage rates, and partially it's a little bit more of public housing involvement in those redevelopments.
And I think like in theory, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have some form of the operating subsidy in the building you're building or rehabilitating, you're almost certainly going to be subject to prevailing wage. But if there was if for example on one of these sites the piece of vacant land that you could build on was subdivided and then ground leased or something to a developer, and there was no public housing subsidy or Section 8 or other kind of substantial HUD involvement, like HUD insured first mortgage or HUD insurance on the bonds, you could potentially get around doing prevailing wage. So there are ways to do that, and they make a real difference. Like there's a substantial premium to costs with prevailing wage.
So Alex and John, would you foresee using the federal tax credit program to help finance these properties? And is it true that there's more tax credit availability these days because of the federal government's, their increased funding of the tax credit program?
Yeah, that's a great question. Alex, I can start. So I think, yeah, low-income housing tax credits is kind of the backbone of almost any new construction that's going to happen. And I think the question is kind of whether it's competitive 9% credits, which would require kind of going into a competitive round, and a lot of times require a period of waiting to be allocated or awarded those credits. And then on the other hand, there's non-competitive 4% credits, which requires potentially less waiting or slightly less valuable. But I think more than likely either one of those two would be a part of new construction.
And just to clarify for folks who might not be aware, when we talk about the low-income housing tax credit, it's exclusively for rental development. You can't use that for new home ownership. So we're talking about it in the context of this, which rental cooperative housing, sort of a form of rental housing, could use the low-income housing tax credits.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
One, we've wrestled with the question about the additional land because when we worked with the consultant before, it seemed like that was sort of a deal breaker for the pro forma looking good. So if there isn't another identifiable piece of land in the community, is there still some way, given everything you've just told us, to add units at the existing sites in a way that is fundable and viable? Because it seems like it wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, I think I thought about that a lot too. Just recognizing it's tough to just come up with a big piece of land
Yeah.
that you can build on, like who has that, especially around here. But I think it would be a challenge. I think you'd to kind of, if we run with this strategy of like there needs to be more density for a variety of reasons, it probably looks more like you would have to demolish the existing housing and redevelop it more densely. And we said that it would be difficult to get state funding for that because of the condition of the housing. But that, I think we're specifically talking about like the Housing Opportunities Grant. It's possible you could do it without that state level financing mechanism and do it as a just a straight up kind of a more conventional tax credit deal. But the issues you still run into is that when you're replacing those public housing units, those are not generating surplus cash. And so those are kind of an overall drag. You are building 80 or so units that you need pretty much all free money to build because you can't bring in any sort of third-party market capital. And so if you can't figure out how to kind of bring in a different operating subsidy like project-based Section 8 vouchers, it becomes still really challenging, even when you have kind of a nice development site in a really attractive community that for a lot of reasons would make these really competitive applications. You still have that kind of, how do you replace the public housing and do it in a way that you're not really kind of needing something like a Housing Opportunities Grant or something similar to it. So the short answer is it's tough.
To follow up on Peggy's question, and I think hearing your presentation, and your comments, which are appreciated, it's gonna get like a lot of what if scenarios. So assuming the conditions remain on Newport, and that's a challenge, that sort of creates, and then not loading place, but the Plains has got maybe some issues with the butters in terms of density. That casts a little cloud on the development. What do you think the impact of having Pleasant Street would do in terms of ramping up feasibility?
It would help because I think you'd get other developers, Harbor Light, and the other kind of larger capable developers thinking, okay, maybe this project could pencil out, it could work financially. I think that's a real key, I think, because I don't wanna, like what I was just talking about, kind of redeveloping the existing sites. It might be possible, I do not wanna write that off in any way, cause I just haven't looked at it closely enough, but it feels like it would be challenging, and so bringing in another site, again, like I hate to keep coming back to this, but it is the easiest path to a more attractive, kind of viable project overall, I think, that a developer would wanna work on.
When you say alternate site, do you mean if we suddenly found 20 acres somewhere, would the state be willing to give up the land that the current public housing is on and transfer it all to another site?
I think if you found a 20-acre site and you're proposing relocating all of the existing units to a new, I don't know. I don't see, kind of on its face, why not, if it's in Manchester by the Sea. John, does anything about that hypothetical?
I mean, yeah, I don't know, I mean, it seems like the existing housing is in pretty good shape, and I don't know, yeah, I don't know if the state would wanna, that might be more cost than kind of other alternatives, but I honestly haven't looked that closely at it.
So one of the problems, this is senior housing we're talking about. All the second floor units are walk-up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And one of the things we talked about early on was at least using the second floor for non-senior housing and replacing the senior housing in another building
Yeah,
with
an
an
elevator.
elevator. And we heard there was gonna be pushback from the state on that even.
I don't know exactly why. It seems like it would be in the state's interest to have a community, a senior community that's accessible and kind of conforms to the current code. Yeah, I don't think there would be major philosophical issues at the state level with any of what you've proposed. It might be minor challenges, but you know, the concept of like moving subsidy to a different site is not unknown. It's somewhat common, so. Especially when there are, you know, accessibility issues, existing currently in the housing, yeah. You know, you could, just to kind of run with that idea a little bit, you could, like putting an elevator, an accessible elevator building at one of these existing sites is also something that you could do. But again, you kind of always go back to that, if you're recreating the public housing without adding at least maybe a 1-for-1 of additional housing that can create operating surplus to make the whole thing kind of work together and bring in some outside capital you're not just going to the state or the town or whomever and saying, we need, you know, all of this and it all needs to be free money. It's still kind of a challenge.
From a developer perspective, what would be more attractive, a development lease or a fee simple arrangement? Assuming we nail down some of these.
Yeah, I think I don't think we do a lot of our projects are on long-term ground leases. But that doesn't mean, I think any developer would rather fee simple. It's easier in a way. But I don't think it presents a real issue either way, yeah. I think.
but yeah, I think that's right, I think lenders and investors have gotten more and more comfortable with the long-term ground lease, and so I don't think it's really a hurdle for folks.
Yeah, it's just gotta be like 99 years or something of sufficient length that it provides buffer at the end of a 40-year amortizing loan, and you know, there are all these different lender and investor requirements, but it's very common.
And as a slight follow-up, in your work with public housing authorities, what, from a developer perspective, what do you, in terms of that relationship, what do you think is, oh, it's no problem? This is something we, yes, we want to work on with the PHA. This is something that we need to talk about. Are there any non-starter type of things, again, from the developer perspective?
John, do you have any initial reactions to that question?
I mean, I guess the first thing I'm thinking about is just around property management and kind of asset management. I think a lot of developers would want to have some control over kind of how the property that they build is operated, the services that they provide. So I think, you know, we've kind of collaborated with housing authorities in that respect, but.
John, have you seen like a little, almost like a partnership agreement with the PHA on that item? Where the developer would have a role, but the public housing authority would be part of a team, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there's an agreement in Somerville where, you know, POA provides the property management, the housing authority is still engaged in some of the resident services. There's a sharing of the management fee between the two parties. But I think, you know, if the housing authority had said, we want to control everything, there's just a little bit, you know, in terms of compliance and low-income housing tax credit regulations, there's just enough going on that POA would want to have some control over those things so we didn't fall out of compliance. But I absolutely think that it's possible to have, a kind of a shared understanding of roles and both have a kind of a shared responsibility there.
Any roles that you see as problematic?
In terms of the housing authority's role in
Yes.
ongoing operations? Well, I mean, I think typically, you know, the housing authority, if there's vouchers, they manage the wait list, and then our management would do screening and compliance. I think a non-starter would be around screening and compliance and kind of administrative pieces for the folks in the new buildings. But I think if it was a mix of kind of existing public housing, I think, you know, a developer would be fine with those continuing to be run and operated as public housing by the housing authority.
And just to explain like a little bit about the compliance piece is like, if you finance a development using low-income housing tax credits, the developer sponsor, which would be like POA, is kind of on the hook for all those tax credits. You bring in a third-party investor who essentially purchases those credits. They don't technically purchase them, they become a partner, but a passive partner. But if any of them are recaptured, the government takes them back because we have not rented the apartments to people that are eligible under the income restrictions. We as the developer are obligated to pay back those credits to the investor, and these are, you know, tens of millions of dollars, and so it's rare, but it's kind of a life or death thing for organizations like POA to make sure you're managing. So that's why compliance is an important piece of the management arrangement.
Gotcha.
I have a question, just because I'm not quite sure when you're talking about, like Section 8, that's federal, is that correct?
Yeah, that's a
We're
federal
state,
program.
where's our existing ones are state,
That's right.
but can those commingle somehow, and can you get Section 8 if you're a state facility?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's not common, but it is what we did at Clarendon Hill in Somerville. And so essentially, and again, I think that's a little different because it's demolition, and then, you know, POA is bringing back those existing residents to a new building that we'll own and manage. So they're still state public housing residents, but 25% of those units that are replaced are now have Section 8 federal vouchers, project-based Section 8 on those units. And so it's, a quarter of the units have kind of shifted from state public housing to having federal requirements. So there's still, there's, again, compliance issues around kind of a reduction in the number of state public housing and replacing them with federal requirements, even though it is one-to-one replacement overall of public housing units. But I think it sounds like in these parcels, I think we would be adding new buildings and, so I think adding Section 8 in those new buildings wouldn't kind of have the same issues around reducing the number of state public housing units.
And John, what about Massachusetts rental voucher program subsidy? Could that kind of also be, could that be incorporated in some way here in like a novel way, or?
Yeah, no, we have project-based MRVPs. So absolutely, so that would actually be a better match for state public housing because there's the same state regs. And so that's a great, that's a
Big
great
difference
point.
in the administrative fee though.
Yes.
Alex and John, could you just talk for a moment on the Somerville? You outlined, I think we pursued this in conversations with the old DHCD. You mentioned the partnership to expand the Housing Opportunities Grant to PHO.
Mhm.
Is that is that something, and if so, does this type of development lend itself to an application?
Yeah, so for the first part, it is competitive, and my understanding is that housing authorities apply when there's a round to, I'm going to say THCD, but Housing and Livable Communities Office. Housing authorities would apply and propose something that would then could use the capital funds under PHO. And originally it was really kind of the structure was, a third state, a third local money, and a third cross subsidy from market rate development on the site. So I think originally it really needed scale to have a large market rate presence to cover a third of the cost. I think it's shifted since the first round that Clarendon Hill was in. And I think really kind of the fundamentals are it needs to be a strong housing market, which applies here, and a desirable place that there could be some cross subsidy on site. And I don't, Alex, is there a second round that was released? Do you know?
I don't think it has officially been released, but I think that's our expectation that a second round is going to be released.
And are they coordinated with the state annual funding round? I would assume so, but I don't
know, John, do you know that?
you apply for the PHO as well as whether there's tax credit or?
Yeah, they were actually entirely separate for us, and part of the reason I think was that one of our restrictions was that we couldn't apply for any other competitive funds. So we couldn't apply for 9% tax credits, and we couldn't apply for any soft money. And so it was kind of a separate. It was under the public housing shop in DHCD at the time versus the multifamily shop that does LIHTC. So it was kind of a separate process.
Would PHO would these be less or equally competitive if there wasn't, demolition and new construction of the public housing involved? Does PHO, for whatever reason, anticipate redeveloping communities rather than rehabbing and adding on to them, or is that not a distinction that they care about?
I think one of the program goals is to take distressed public housing and kind of revitalize it. So I think if there's some level of rehab, you know, in terms of accessibility or otherwise, I think that would make it eligible. And then I think, I mean, the overarching goal is really just to add density and add new affordable housing. So I think, you know, I think this would meet those two goals.
And just out of curiosity, my sense from both like what the projected capital needs were in the report as well as just seeing the communities, these are not distressed communities, right? These are, they're operating fine and maybe there are accessibility issues or perhaps I'm wrong, I don't know, but I didn't get the sense that they looked good to me.
I get the sense there's somewhat delayed maintenance and
Yeah, I
rehabilitation
mean, there's
that's,
always a capital plan, of course, to do so much with it, as much as you can.
Yeah.
From what the state gives to, I don't think I'd call them distressed, I'd say they're old.
Yeah.
They need work, some more than others. I mean, people live in all of them. Difficulty, of course, being the second floor
Yeah.
ones. They look better on the outside than they do on the
Isn't it facelift?
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of the point of this project. That's why where we started a long time ago was that because of the way public housing is financed, like there aren't funds to
Yep.
keep up the units that already exist. And so we need to make sure we're taking care of what we already have and also adding new. You know, that's sort of the joint purpose of this project. And there's never really been an opportunity to do both worlds at the same time, except for a handful of years ago when the state started looking at that because they recognized that the public housing is not being maintained. And there was just an article on WBUR about, you know, how across the state there's thousands of units that are sitting vacant and the predominant reason is need for maintenance and repair. So it's a bigger problem than just our small community, but this is sort of our effort to try to address our local challenges.
And
Yeah.
it is ironic that the federal government is actually ahead of Massachusetts in terms of taking care of public housing. We should be the leader, not the follower here. I have another question, which is, do you see a role for the Affordable Housing Trust here? Do you work with trusts and other projects? Do they
Oh, yes.
contribute funds and?
It's very important, yeah, I think the short answer is absolutely. I think for a variety of reasons, I think that kind of fundamentally, to get a project funded at the state level, you have to have local commitment, and there's no better local commitment than a financial commitment. You know, the projects that are gonna get funded eventually are the projects that the communities in which they're in are saying, we want this to happen. And so the affordable housing trusts are really important players and advocates in that piece of the puzzle. And like I said, financial assistance is like a really important symbolic contribution from the state's eyes. And it's also helpful, but and it also, you know, it makes developers more comfortable that the permitting process and pre-development isn't going, there are advocates in the community that you're not going to be kind of dragging something along, kicking and screaming, and there are going to be some, you know, people who are helping you. Because that's kind of, from a developer's perspective, a really lengthy adversarial entitlement process is not only just not fun to go through, but it's also extremely costly in staff time, design fees, lawyers' fees, and everything. And that can, especially for smaller developers, can be very risky to embark in. So yeah, I think affordable housing trusts are really important.
Would something like a pre-development loan be appropriate for an affordable housing trust?
It could be, yeah. I think any sort of long-term financial commitment is important. For a group like POA, it's appreciated. We wouldn't necessarily need pre-development money because we kind of self-fund that, but I think that a pre-development loan that can be convertible into a long-term loan into the project would be great for smaller nonprofit developers, but I think just a long-term kind of financial commitment early on is really important for both economic and symbolic reasons. And I think
Yeah,
that,
and,
yeah,
and
John, go
Alex,
ahead.
just to add, sorry, no, I think it's definitely symbolic, and I think it's also more than that, just in terms of construction costs. You know, there's no state program that can cover the full construction cost, and so it really is critical to have local financial support in terms of long-term grant or loans that can make the project feasible, just given kind of the current climate and the challenges.
Yeah, I certainly didn't mean to downplay that real tangible value of the money. John, have you ever done a project that hasn't had local investment in it? I think it's sort of unheard of recently, at least.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it takes a village, and there's always a you know, kind of an alphabet soup of state, federal, local funds. So there's typically local involvement is very helpful.
I would sense, depending on the size of the city, the extent, and the size of the project and the financing need, that amount will vary. A small town like Manchester versus Boston or so, you're gonna see, but I would guess that, municipal support would be important.
I mean, it's a big factor in how competitive you are
Yeah.
when you're applying for the funds, when you go through the rounds and wait your turn and the cycles. I mean, we've been, through my work, we've done that, and that was always impressed upon us, like that is a factor in how competitive your application looks to the state. When you're going in for these things, they want to know that there are people in town that are behind it and that are going to support it coming to fruition, you know?
So I've got 10 after 5, and I noted that 5 o'clock would probably be the time. I know we've gone over a lot, and personally, I've heard some stuff that was like, ugh.
I know, I feel bad, I don't mean to be the bearer.
No, I mean, we
It's really
certainly
helpful.
had a sense of that, but I think it's also important to get a professional perspective as well. So I'm just thinking out loud, in terms of next steps, is there anything that we should put out there right now? We don't have the opportunity of meeting again. If we want to have another meeting with Paula, let's say, I'm just gonna throw this, say in 3 weeks or so, we're not gonna have a meeting in a week to talk about, well, what do you think, how'd our engagement go? I'm offering this as an opportunity.
It almost seems like we have to find some other location, but I don't know where.
Well, I think,
Where's the 20 acres you were talking
Oh,
about?
God,
I do think that the MBTA task force is looking at areas to zone that would allow for housing, so it may be coming out of that, there might be some, a parcel identified.
Actually, that's another question for Paula, which is the MBTA zoning requirement mandate.
Yeah.
That intersects with all of this, I guess, almost in every city and town in the Commonwealth. Do you think that's a way to leverage some of this somehow?
I think the simple answer is yes, and that it will enable rezoning for multifamily. But John, have you thought about MBTA communities and how kind of what effect it may or what opportunity it may create in a situation like this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely help with kind of pushing a little bit on the density piece, just in terms of town support and kind of having that conversation with neighbors. So I think it helps move the needle there, which, maybe helps with scale in terms of the development. So I'm not as connected to Alex in the local politics, but I think, it definitely helps to have kind of, the state pushing on that side, because density and kind of impact to others is a big issue to work through, so it kind of helps push there a little bit. So yeah, absolutely, I think that's a good tool for multifamily housing.
Yeah, and I think the other just question I'd ask before we break is that so does the housing authority administer a housing choice voucher program as well?
No.
No, okay. I'm just thinking, like the other tool again is like how do you bring in kind of a different type of operating subsidy to make the operating profile more financeable? So obviously the site is in some ways like the 20 acres is a nice clean way of addressing things, but it's also of course it's a unicorn in many respects. So if if that's the only thing we're talking about, it could just be it's unhelpful. So what are the other tools, and it's how do you bring in some different type of operating subsidy to kind of amp up the existing public housing, and I don't know, but John and I can do a little bit of thinking about that over between the course of now.
I think a possible next step is, given our discussion on a scaled back plan, you guys think about what would be realistic, or is it we need to have more land? A scaled back plan in the
Yeah.
context of
What's the
feasibility,
non-excess land plan,
development costs, possible financing in the context of state funding.
Mhm.
I think that'd be important.
Chris has a map.
Any other consideration that? I mean, we could sort of nitpick on some details, but I think there's some overarching issues that, such as the, what was outlined in Newport and the Plains. Personally, I think the Plains is a nice site in the back. You do make a note of the appearance of the abutting property in the back left, but in terms of putting a two-story, three-story building, it's sort of into a hill, so you're backing into that. I think that would be appropriate. But
Yeah,
as with
yeah.
everything, it's, how abutters react, and, I mean, we've had some good outreach.
Yeah.
But, until we actually have a plan, I mean, you never
Yeah.
know.
Do you, I was just gonna ask, as far as the town, is that a set in stone thing now? I mean, we had a town meeting where they gave us, a very positive idea about what to do with Pleasant Street, but now you're saying the town is that done, or,
It's a facilities master plan
okay?
that's been completed.
Well, it has to go to town meeting.
Has to go to,
No, it doesn't have to go to town.
No, the plan doesn't, but.
No.
But any reuse
No,
of the
no,
land.
I know that, it's not
Yeah.
like we have the land, but I'm just saying, it seemed as though we had the support of the town and of the selectmen and of,
But
everybody.
the consultant basically said there's no other land available.
but I
It's
agree
the
with,
problem.
I agree with you, Gretchen. I acknowledge what Sarah is saying.
Yeah,
But it seems like that is just one piece of information, and I see it as part of our process.
yeah,
Now, what does the select board do with that information?
yeah,
Is there engagement with the town, or maybe even a town meeting saying, this is what has been recommended? However, at the same time, when we convened the master planning process, what was it, like 3 years ago, and we did all the little dots and we looked at Pleasant Street, my takeaway was overwhelming support for
Yeah.
housing.
Yeah.
And if I was a resident on Pleasant Street and I were to find out that I'm gonna have a fire station or a police station right next to my house, I'd rather see the housing context continuing. So I'm just curious if,
It's
I don't know.
just, it's a matter of lack of developable land.
Yeah.
And the problem is the space behind town hall floods.
yeah, exactly.
oh, yeah.
So that cuts that out.
So just continuing on that, are there any other parcels that have been identified for certain things, like the compost site? Or,
The plan, the facilities plan is the DPW moving to the compost site.
okay,
Public safety moving to the the Pleasant Street DPW site, police moving out of town hall, which will free up space for the people in Seaside One to move back, because Seaside One is 100% likely to flood.
What about the fire station
Right.
site
That's the open question of what that would be used for.
and
Yeah.
possibly the Baptist church, if that was
Yeah.
unavailable?
Well, and yeah, there's also a question of whether, maybe some of the areas up off School Street and stuff under the MBTA zoning could be zoned for higher density that might open up a space
One
That's
second,
for
One
one
affordable
second,
housing.
Axel. I mean, I think at a minimum, we all know that we have a liaison to the select board on the Affordable Housing Trust. I think at a minimum, engagement with the select board is important in the context of the
Yeah.
response we got from a developer who says quite clearly, this plan that you've been working on, this plan that has been vetted in the neighborhood at a very preliminary level, has non-binding support from a town meeting, is a little bit in jeopardy without Pleasant Street. They need to hear that, because I don't think it's just one, or I think they have to weigh that. So I could reach out to Muffin and tell her that.
Yeah.
And I think she could talk to the select board. Perhaps we have an item on the agenda at their next, at an upcoming meeting, where we could just give a little take away from what we have from POA.
Yeah.
Just so that they're aware of that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot riding on what we've been working on. So, Axel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Axel Magnuson. I have a request, I guess, that POA would address whatever specific objections developers raised in not responding to the RFPs, the original 2 RFPs. You mentioned that at the very beginning. And from all of this conversation, I guess that part of it is the issue of the density, the number of units, which Pleasant Street gets into. Part of it is the financing mechanism to be chosen, and then management. I'm curious to see how, on a one-to-one mapping basis, POA addresses the objections that were raised by potential developers. That's my question.
So the question, Axel, is how does, I'm a little unclear on exactly the question. Is it how does the one-to-one plan address like kind of the objections that have been raised? Yeah, okay. The one-to-one, there's no magic in that, and I think to be honest, I think one-to-one might be low. You might need more like 1-2 or something like that. But I don't know what the objections that were raised are by other developers, but my guess is that they probably just saw something that was probably difficult to do, given the circumstances. And speaking very much off the cuff without really looking at some hard numbers, I think that the 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 kind of ratio is that for every one public housing, you're creating at least one non-public housing that you can rent for or rent that is greater than your operating expenses. You're creating a little bit of surplus cash flow that you can finance and bring mortgage proceeds in. So it's it's a really important capital source, both on its own as well as if you're using tax exempt bonds, it generates 4% low-income housing tax credits, which brings in another capital source. And then over the long term, if you're a partner with a housing authority and you have raised financing that is kind of reliant on cash flow to service debt or just to operate the buildings, make sure people are housed, you want at least that one unit of housing that is creating surplus cash flow to offset kind of the one unit of public housing it's just covering its expenses. And that's a pretty skinny margin 1-to-1. So if the more you can add that generates surplus, the better for kind of the capital project and then the long-term health.
So essentially you're saying that this issue of Pleasant Street, that is the additional units, gets to be really sort of critical issue.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think you could do something different where if you're just looking at the public housing, you say, we just need to make this more appropriate for the residents that are there now, and you're not looking at doing kind of a major redevelopment, maybe a totally different scale of a project. Maybe there's a different approach there, and we haven't really thought about that, and we haven't, in our history, done something like that. It would be a lot lower it would be a much smaller scope. But that's, I guess, probably that would be the plan C, maybe. What do you do to just stabilize or address the needs of the existing residents?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, in terms of a next step, what I've heard and felt is if we can just have a little bit further engagement on a scaled back plan, what would be the impact on that?
Mhm.
Is there anything else?
I'd like to amend that a little bit.
Go ahead.
How much density would be required on the existing sites? Maybe we're being gun shy, we're just saying a 3-story building is all we can do
Yeah.
politically, but 4 stories would get us there.
It's a good question.
Make that as a note.
Yeah.
Give that some thought.
Yep.
And then I think we'll have some follow-up.
I think you kind of got to the core of it though, that if you don't have another site, then density on the existing sites that's the other route.
Is there anything else?
Covered a lot. Wow.
Are folks comfortable talking about, meeting in, I don't know, is it a type of thing I would say, if you wanna come back and meet with us, great, but given we've met with you and John is on Zoom would be perfectly fine with me.
Yeah.
To help you and POA be available.
Sure, yeah, we're available. I came from Marblehead, so I have to go through Salem during Halloween.
That's a major.
But after Halloween, the commute gets a lot easier,
Are
so.
we thinking, you wanna say 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I know Sarah is on about 5 or 10 boards, so we got.
So, and I'm out of town the first 2 weeks of October.
Should we wait and see about this study, or would it make sense to see about the MBTA study or not?
That'll be,
I think that's something, we
further down
certainly
the road.
can, you
You think it's too far down the road?
it's too far down the road, but I think it's certainly something that the members of that task force will take into account and see if there's a way. We need, I think it's 20 acres beyond the half-mile radius. So we're gonna be we've been looking at sites to say, okay, what could be zoned that way? The property would still have to be purchased,
Yeah,
but,
Maybe if we put the meeting out a little bit, it will give the housing authority and the Affordable Housing Trust the opportunity to give Muffin an opportunity to talk to the select board and maybe give us an opportunity to meet with the select board to sort of say, this is the predicament we're in.
That makes sense.
Get that information, and depending on what we hear, we can share that with POA at a subsequent meeting, and then maybe that can give us a little bit more definition.
Yeah, no, I think we would need a little bit of time on the scaled back plan to kind of actually
Okay.
put some thought into some numbers to actually make that a worthwhile.
The one thing that I just thought of when Sarah's talking about, when that all gets finalized, is there any town land within that area? Because if not, then I think it would be hard for us to acquire something, because once it's figured out, then developers will know what they can do and it'll be competitive, I think, for certain properties. So I think that's just another thing to keep in mind. even with all the MBTA rezoning or compliance, that doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a viable site for
Yeah.
us. So,
I see hands. Steve, why don't you just identify yourself,
Sure.
address, etc.
Steve Gang, 12 Ashland. I'm actually here to talk about a very small point and test the waters with you folks, but I only have a few minutes before I'm supposed to be actually overdue to give the little speech at Chris Bertoni's retirement party. We're losing our great conservation agent, but this morning I think we hired a replacement.
Oh, good for you.
So may I spend a
Go ahead.
second?
Yeah.
It's occurred to the Open Space Recreation Committee that the preliminary sketches at Newport Park for expansion put the expansion on a perennial stream and in or right next to a marsh. And everybody's aware that that's difficult, if not impossible, under existing wetlands protection laws. So somebody, I think it was Helen Bethel, said, well, we own the land all around that, it's town land. How about a 1-for-1 swap? And that's what I want to test the waters on, is that the idea, it may not be feasible, but there's nothing immediately besides time and energy that is the obstacle to giving frontage on Pine Street south of Newport Park in return for an equal amount of.
So going into town on 127, you're saying as you leave Newport Park on the left,
Yeah,
Are you talking about beyond where the rock comes out? Or-
beyond the little parking
Beyond
spots,
the two houses, right?
yeah, there's two little parking spots.
Yeah,
going into
And then there's a
town.
lot of woods.
Okay.
That's
Uh,
Powder House.
Culminates in a trailhead. It's Powder House owned by the town. That's
Okay.
actually,
So is that parkland?
it's conservation land, but under conservation rules, if we can get through all the red tape, I believe we're entitled to do an equal swap. And if we were swapping for actual wetland resource, it would be an easy argument to make.
So when you say 1-for-1, Steve, you mean, I'll just round it off. 1 acre at Newport, you can get 1 acre,
Something like that.
something like that, okay.
You have to talk to town council as the next step if it has any appeal here.
I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
it's a
Well,
very
I
interesting
don't think we should say no to anything.
No,
We should
no.
look at it.
Because I was actually thinking about that too, like how, you know, looking at that stream there, it's like, they're gonna let us fill there.
So how big is that piece, that parcel that she's willing to swap?
No, we've gotta look at
The town parcel
Yeah.
is 26 acres or something, so there's a lot of land there.
Yeah.
The frontage from the trailhead that's past the last house to the little parking space is 600 or 800 feet, so there's room to maneuver.
No one has put any pen or drafting. This is more just a concept that has been discussed at your committee, and I mean, it's addressing a concern that we've sort of had, and then we're hearing today from, so if we fast forward and this were to happen, the land in Newport you wouldn't see any change. It would be, but it's just a form of an agreement, or I don't know, but
We probably put a granite marker on the edge of it that says, you know, perpetual conservation resource
Okay.
or something.
so just from the point of the housing authority and for residents at Newport Park, there would be no there'd be no change. I mean, clearly, while there's been support for our plan, it's been in the context of Newport. So we go outside of Newport, we start going on Pine Street, it changes the context. I think it's appealing, but it's gonna require more community outreach but it just sounds like it's very, very preliminary. It's just an idea.
Yeah.
And the question is, should we take the next step? Sounds like we should go to town council and say, you know, is this harebrained or is it feasible? And is it a year or 3 or 5 to get this done through the state agencies? And meanwhile, you can think about what you need to do to socialize it and get citizen reaction.
First, I think it would be important to get that opinion, just to find out, is it a red light, yellow light, or a green light?
Yes.
I think it'd also be important to see on a map what exactly land swap would look like, the property parcels.
Yeah, I was tempted to bring something, but I think that's premature. It would also, by the way, get rid of a nagging little issue that Open Space and Concom have with the Newport Park property, which is an easement that is no longer available for access, and we could maybe kill that little bird along.
Yeah.
Yeah, same stuff.
Do you mean access them behind into Powder House?
You know, I don't even want.
I don't wanna go there,
It's a
yeah.
long-standing thing about how people get into Powder House from Pine Street. And there are other access points. We created a new one just beyond, just north of Newport Park, in order to avoid the trail that used to run right into the backyards. Because that's the old trail that's been there
Right.
apparently for decades before construction.
So my question to all of us is that the inquiry to town council, is that something that we should be doing? Or is that something that, since Steve and who's coming from the Open Space Committee,
It's really a Concom question.
Concom, is that the type of thing that you would then pursue?
Yeah.
Oh,
And Concom discussed it 2 nights ago, and we were ready to,
okay,
agreeable to ask Concom.
so take the little step. Well,
Makes sense.
We appreciate you coming to us and talking about that, and being open and transparent, so it's not like what's going on behind the scenes, you're talking to us. Definitely, I would,
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, you know, it's
I mean,
well-
there's no harm in finding out about whether it's just a feasible
Yeah.
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
and then
and if we hear that it's possible, then we could,
Then it gets hard.
then,
We have Gary Gilbert on Zoom who has his hand raised.
so, okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, John, I've gotta run to
Yeah.
get
Thanks
home
very
to
much.
kids, but.
We will stay in touch with you
Yeah,
regarding
absolutely.
the next step. We
Yep,
appreciate
here
it.
at your disposal.
Okay.
Thanks, nice to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you guys very much.
Thank you, John.
John, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have someone on Zoom who has raised hand.
Gary Gilbert.
Gary, we recognize you, go ahead.
Hi,
Gary, if you could just state your name and your address for the record, please?
Gary Gilbert, 11 Magnolia Ave. Kind of grim news here. I think a land swap, I would support that. I think it's a great idea. It's an idea that's been out there for a little while, but it'd be good to take some action on it. I was gonna ask you, what do you guys know about a no-action strategy? What happens? He mentioned over 1,000 units are laying fallow in the state. I assume those are buildings that are boarded up and just, waiting to be demolished. I mean, is that what happens if we can't do anything?
Gary, what are you referring to when you say 1,000 units?
Alex said that there were 1,000 units not being used because they're in too bad shape.
In the state.
Public housing.
Yeah,
I-
state public housing
I
across
think
the state.
Peggy sort of summarized it as a combination.
Yeah, they're not demolished, it's just that the issue is that there are units that people could be housed in, but they're unable to be housed in them because of how it's financed and the housing authorities cannot, part of the issue is that they cannot make the repairs they need. The other issue is around the new way that the new portal that they use to assign the unit. So it's a combination issue, but it's just that the primary reason given by housing authorities for why those units, they need extensions to the vacancy is the need for repair. So it's just making the point that that because of how public housing is financed, there is a challenge and they can only do so much with what they have, and that's why this type of project is important.
But, right, but at some point, the units become, I'll call it unsanitary, or unhabitable. Is that what happens at some point, and then the people have to be moved out?
These are just vacancies that
No,
don't
he's
get
asking
filled.
about our
Oh, our
housing,
units?
if there's not money invested by the state. Will they go into such state of disrepair that they'll
Go ahead,
have to be
Gretchen.
vacant?
I don't know the exact answer to that. I know, right now, our places are leased up almost immediately, but a waiting list of people waiting to get in. And, they're kept up as well as we can do it, you know, we don't have any empty ones that are vacant because of no repairs.
Well, we
We have
have,
one,
we had 2 units that had to have repairs, I think.
yes, but
and
they're
But
being
they're-
repaired. We
they
know
are
they're
being
doing it, yeah.
repaired.
So how's that funding happen?
Perhaps
Go ahead, Gary.
perhaps my question's not clear enough.
Yes.
If you guys can't come up with a successful plan, because the hurdles seem big, okay? They do seem big, but if you don't come up with a successful plan, do these units that we have in our town eventually get into more and more disrepair, and eventually they will become vacant buildings? Is that the inevitable potential? People should be aware of it.
It's never happened here, and I don't see it in the near future happening, so I can't tell you the answer to that.
No, we have a steady maintenance department that keeps these units up, and as soon as they empty, they go in and they rehab the unit before someone else gets in there, so it's not like
Okay, yeah.
they're not in such a state where you're gonna tear the building down because they're in disrepair,
Yeah.
they're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Gary? Thank you, Gary. So in terms of a next step, it almost seems like it's presumptuous to put a date down for a meeting until we have a little,
I think you need to talk to Meffin first,
yeah.
and get it.
Do you want to see if we can at least maybe put a placeholder date while we're all here?
Sure.
The other question too, that I'm not sure where we stand on it, but you know, the whole idea of with this project, if we have 84 and we're adding 84, what does that do
Yeah.
to the percent of affordable in the community, and what does that do to the 40B? Because that's also, I know, a concern people have had. So I feel like we looked at that before, but I don't remember anymore. You know, just
I'm
the
sorry?
count. I don't know where we are as a town, you know, like how many units we need in order to
About
be.
115, I think, or maybe 130-ish?
No,
To get to our 10%.
additional,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
additional, yes.
So this would be
We created-
84 out of 115.
We need a total of 253, I believe, because I think we have 2,500
Yeah, that's right.
parcels, something like that, so we need over
3433.
2433, thank you,
So I guess that's just to say that
243.
this project could make a big dent in that effort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that is the reason why we've had support from SEMA, I think the town
Right.
meeting. It's sort of like a backdrop to what's going on across the highway on the hill.
Yeah.
So is the end of October, or like maybe the first week in November?
Halloween.
I thought Alex said they needed some time
Yeah, so I was
to
thinking,
come up with the,
well,
Do we need to, but should we meet?
we need some time to do a little work ourselves. Do you, like the week of November 6th, that would give 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Don't forget the 7th is election day.
Yes.
It's not election day here, is it?
November 9th is, I know it's.
7th.
No, but, well,
Oh, the 9th I can't,
it's
out
the
of
only
the
day that
country.
week I can do.
Oh, so Wednesday the 8th is.
I could do
Wednesday, 8th is no.
So the folks who are involved in a lot of committees, who might be sitting to my left, what would be a good time that you think, rather than me just throwing out?
Well, the week of the 13th, I have the Tuesday available, the 14th. Or Thanksgiving week, the beginning of the
No,
week.
how about, let's hold on the 14th.
14th.
How does the 14th look for folks?
Looks good.
it's good for me.
14th is good.
Why don't we,
I can't do it, but I don't count on, it's just I'm gonna be away
Yeah,
and it starts the middle of that week and goes to the next week, so.
I would propose a 6 o'clock time rather than 4,
Yeah.
Yeah.
if that's okay. 11, 14 at 6. And that's, we're gonna put a hold on that. Let's, if folks are okay, I could talk to Muffin and Gretchen and the Housing Authority got if you wanna talk to her as well.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a little picture movement
Alright, yeah.
to emphasize the importance of sharing information with the select board so they understand that the implication of making a quick decision, well, not quick, the importance on Pleasant Street.
I don't think you're gonna get
At least I wanna
any
make,
type of decision.
yeah, you know, I agree, that's
You
fair.
know,
But
it's-
at least I want them to be aware
Mhm.
of the predicament we're in right now.
Yeah.
So, okay. I'll stay in touch with folks and maybe.
Sure.
The Affordable Housing Trust has two other items on the agenda. So we're gonna continue, but I'll give you guys an opportunity to close your meeting.
I'll move to adjourn the Manchester Housing Authority portion of the meeting.
A second. All those in favor? No opposed. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
all your work, my God.
Yes, thank you.
We have two administrative
See you on Monday.
actions. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of August 23rd, 2023? Actually, we haven't,
I didn't read
we
it.
haven't received them.
Yes, we
No,
did.
we're good.
Oh, we got them, but the date was wrong.
Yeah.
That was the only thing.
Yeah.
So was that the one?
That was the agenda, I believe, on the agenda, I
I
think.
can't remember.
We received them. from
Oh, yeah, yep.
I haven't seen it yet, so. Can we just put it on?
We'll carry it over to the
Yeah.
next meeting. And then Peggy has provided an update on the emergency rental and mortgage assistance program.
Yeah, and that got emailed out.
Yep.
And again, there's nothing special to
Yeah,
note, it's
we
just
got that.
continuing on and
Is there any comment that we should, or any observation that we should be aware of that maybe we need to take action on?
I don't think right now, I feel like it's being accessed, but it's not
At a high
at the
rate.
at the same pace that it was in the past. So I think it's been really helpful to a number of people, especially with the changes that we had made a little while
The
back.
expansion of the
Yeah.
eligibility.
So that's been really helpful, and I know I think enrolled somebody new just last week or something, because I know Karen was waiting to do the report, so people are still utilizing the resource, which is good.
Great, thank you. Other matters?
I told you about that house that's for
Oh,
sale
thank
on
you.
Brook Street. I have no idea about it.
I looked at it, one bite.
Yeah,
Just as background,
Tree Brook,
yeah,
yeah, Gretchen sent me an email, CC Joan, just giving a heads up on.
I don't remember getting that.
oh,
Yeah.
I did send it to you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, just basically saying, it's a property, it's got almost like a coming attraction.
Yeah,
Be-
is it
be
coming
prepared.
soon?
Coming soon.
it's on the market now.
Is it on the
Yeah.
market?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
How much is it?
How much, do you know?
I have no idea, but
Upper
I know the
900s.
broker, you probably know the broker, Nancy Peterson.
Oh, that's I couldn't remember where I drove by and I saw her name
Yeah,
on something.
So I just emailed her earlier today, just saying,
Yeah, it's close to $1 million.
Yeah,
Affordable Housing Trust. Can you give me a little more details on it?
yeah.
So I can get back to folks.
So it's a 2-family or 3-family?
It's a two-family right now. It's not in great condition.
Yeah, it looks like they had some dumpsters out there today, and it almost looked like they were doing a little, I wouldn't say, it was almost gonna yell up, you guys doing a little demo up there? Because I was on Brook, and it goes back to Desmond. So it looks like it has a little parking on Brook, but it seems like it's got some access on Desmond as well. It's got
I
a,
think it might only have a pathway over there. I don't know how much.
well, there's definitely parking.
$9.99.
$9.99, really?
Uh-huh.
All right, and that, my three families coming on the market for $3 million.
Well, there's the one over on Ashland that's on for almost $6 million. Maybe we can do that
Oh,
one.
my God.
When I hear back from the broker, if it's something that it's enticing, I can
Okay.
email.
Yeah, just, I know we talked before about multifamily houses and looking for them, and
Who's the owner?
Pepper, Georgia Pepper, who owned it, died recently. And this is her son, and I don't know, the second apartment was rented, I don't know if it is now or not. but I think he lives there alone in his apartment. But he does, you know, I don't imagine that he has the income to keep it up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I just saw it and thought, well,
Maybe you can go sell Muffin's mother's house.
huh, oh.
That's,
So, do I have a second,
for what?
or, I'm sorry, a second, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We're all set, great. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting.
So do we